The biting wind of the Alaskan wilderness was a constant companion to Elara, a relentless sculptor of her spirit. At 20, she carried the weight of a life far too harsh for her years, her hands calloused, her eyes holding a flicker of defiance that even the unforgiving landscape couldn't extinguish. Her small, isolated cabin, a fragile shell against the vast, indifferent expanse, offered little more than a semblance of shelter. The gold rush, a fever that gripped men's souls, had brought a tide of desperation and danger to these remote lands. Elara, orphaned and alone, found herself a solitary figure in a world overrun by fortune-seekers, many of whom saw opportunity not just in gold, but in vulnerability. She survived by trapping small game and trading furs, her meager earnings barely enough to keep the gnawing hunger at bay. One frigid evening, as the last sliver of sun dipped below the jagged peaks, casting long, menacing shadows, Elara heard the crunch of heavy boots on the snow outside her door. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She knew the type of men who roamed these parts, rough, desperate, and often ruthless. Her hand instinctively went to the worn hunting knife tucked beneath her cot. The knock was loud, insistent, shattering the fragile peace of her solitude. "Open up, girl! We know you're in there!" A gruff voice boomed, laced with an unsettling familiarity. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her, but it was quickly followed by a surge of hardened resolve. She would not be another casualty of this wild frontier. She would fight. The door creaked open, revealing 3 hulking figures, their faces obscured by the shadows in the fur of their hoods. Their eyes, however, glinted with an avarice that had nothing to do with gold. Elara stood her ground, her small frame radiating a surprising strength. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice trembling slightly but firm. The lead man, a brute with a scarred face, stepped forward, a leering smile twisting his lips. "We heard about the girl who lives alone. Heard you might be looking for a way out of this cold." His words were a thinly veiled threat, and Elara knew exactly what he implied. "I'm not for sale," she cried, her voice echoing with a raw, desperate power. "Not to you, not to anyone. If you're enjoying Elara's fight for survival, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories from the Alaskan frontier." The scarred man laughed, a harsh, grating sound that grated on Elara's nerves. "Every woman has her price, little bird, and we're prepared to pay." He took another step, his hand reaching out. Elara recoiled, her knife glinting in the dim light. Just as the situation teetered on the brink of violence, a new voice cut through the tension, deep and resonant. "That's enough, men." All heads turned towards the sound. Standing at the edge of the clearing, silhouetted against the deepening twilight, was a lone figure. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with an air of quiet authority. His face, though weathered by the elements, held a stern, unyielding gaze. This was Elias Thorne, a gold miner known for his solitary nature and his unwavering sense of justice, a rare commodity in these lawless lands. He had been tracking a rogue bear through the woods and had stumbled upon the scene by chance. The scarred man, surprised by the interruption, sneered, "This ain't your business, Thorne. Move along." Elias took a slow, deliberate step forward, his eyes fixed on Elara, then on the men. "When a woman cries, 'I'm not for sale,' it becomes everyone's business," he stated, his voice calm but firm, a steel edge beneath the placid tone. He wasn't carrying a weapon in his hands, but his presence alone seemed to radiate a quiet danger. The 3 men exchanged uneasy glances. They knew Elias's reputation. He was not one to back down, and he was known to be formidable in a fight. After a tense standoff, the scarred man, clearly weighing the odds, grunted in frustration. "This ain't over," he spat, glaring at Elara, before turning and retreating into the darkness with his companions. Elara watched them go, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and relief. When they were out of sight, she turned to Elias, her eyes wide with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. He simply nodded, his expression unreadable. "You all right, miss?" he asked, his voice softer now. Elara clutched her knife, still wary. "I'm fine," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. Elias Thorne didn't press, nor did he immediately leave. He stood for a moment observing Elara, sensing the deep-seated distrust in her eyes. "It's not safe for you out here alone," he stated, his gaze sweeping over the isolated cabin. "Those men won't forget this." Elara knew he was right. Their retreat was a temporary reprieve, not a permanent solution. The thought of them returning, perhaps with more men, sent a shiver down her spine. "What do you propose?" she asked, her voice still laced with caution. Elias gestured vaguely towards the distant lights of the mining camp, a harsh beacon in the desolate landscape. "I have a claim, a small cabin near the main camp. It's not much, but it's safer than this." He wasn't offering charity, not exactly, but a pragmatic solution. "You could work for me, cook, clean, mend. I'll pay you fairly, and you'd have a roof over your head, away from unwanted attention." Elara hesitated. The idea of being beholden to anyone, especially a man, went against every fiber of her independent spirit. Yet, the alternative was grim. She looked around her small, vulnerable cabin, then out at the encroaching darkness. The cold, the hunger, the constant threat. It was a relentless siege. Elias Thorne seemed different from the other men she'd encountered. There was an honesty in his gaze, a lack of the predatory glint she had come to expect. He wasn't offering coins for her person, but for her labor and a measure of security. After a long, silent moment, she made her decision. "All right," she said, her voice firming, "but I work for myself. No favors, no charity, and if I don't like it, I leave." Elias nodded, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "Agreed. We leave at first light." The tentative alliance was forged, not out of affection, but out of necessity and a shared understanding of the harsh realities of the Alaskan wilderness. Elara knew this was a gamble, but in a land where survival was a daily struggle, sometimes a gamble was all you had. The mining camp was a cacophony of sounds and smells, the clang of metal on rock, the shouts of men, the acrid scent of wood smoke and unwashed bodies. It was a stark contrast to the quiet solitude of Elara's cabin. Elias's cabin, though small, was sturdy and offered a surprising degree of privacy. It was a simple dwelling, a single room with a rough-hewn table, 2 bunks, and a cast-iron stove that radiated a welcome warmth. Elara quickly settled into a routine. She cooked hearty meals over the fire, mended Elias's worn clothes, and kept the cabin clean. The work was demanding, but it was honest, and Elias was true to his word, paying her a small but consistent wage. She learned to navigate the rough-and-tumble environment of the camp, keeping to herself, observing the various characters who populated this transient world. There were men driven by greed, others by desperation, and a few, like Elias, who seemed to possess an underlying decency. Elias, for his part, was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He was fair, respectful, and never overstepped the boundaries of their agreement. He left her to her tasks, and she left him to his mining. Yet a subtle shift began to occur. In the evenings, after the day's toil, they would sometimes share a quiet meal, the only sounds the crackling fire and the howling wind outside. Elara found herself observing him, noting the lines of exhaustion on his face, the quiet strength in his hands. He was a man shaped by the wilderness, resilient and self-reliant. One evening, as Elara was mending a tear in Elias's coat, she looked up to find him watching her. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a quiet contemplation. "You're a strong woman, Elara," he said, his voice low. It wasn't a compliment, but a simple observation, a statement of fact. Elara felt a strange warmth spread through her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. It wasn't about attraction, but about being seen, truly seen, for her resilience and spirit. The camp was still a harsh place, but with Elias, she felt a flicker of something akin to safety. Don't miss out on the rest of Elara's journey. Like this video and subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories. Despite the relative safety of Elias's cabin, the shadows of Elara's past still loomed. The scarred man, whose name she now knew was Silas, and his cronies were still in the camp, their presence a constant, unsettling reminder. They didn't approach her directly, but their glares and the hushed whispers that followed her were enough to keep her on edge. Elara knew they hadn't forgotten their failed attempt, and she suspected they were merely biding their time. One afternoon, while fetching water from the communal well, Elara overheard a fragment of conversation between Silas and another miner. "Thorne's got himself a little helper," Silas sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "Too bad she won't be helping him for long." The words were vague, but the underlying threat was clear. Elara's blood ran cold. It wasn't just about her anymore. They were targeting Elias. She returned to the cabin, her mind racing. She had to warn him. When Elias returned from his claim, his face streaked with dirt, Elara recounted what she had heard, her voice urgent. Elias listened, his expression grim. "Silas is a snake," he said, his jaw tightening. "He's been causing trouble in this camp for months. He won't let this go." He didn't dismiss her fears. Instead, he acknowledged the very real danger they faced. "What do we do?" Elara asked, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. Elias ran a hand through his hair, his gaze distant. "We stay vigilant, and we prepare." He began to reinforce the cabin door, adding extra bolts and a sturdy bar. He sharpened his axe and checked his rifle, ensuring it was loaded and ready. Elara, in turn, began to gather supplies, making sure they had enough food and water to last a few days if they needed to hunker down. The unspoken tension in the cabin was palpable, a silent acknowledgement of the storm brewing on the horizon. The Alaskan weather, mirroring the escalating tension, turned harsh. A blizzard descended upon the camp, trapping everyone indoors. The wind howled like a hungry wolf, and snow piled up against the cabin walls, creating a sense of claustrophobic isolation. While most miners sought refuge from the elements, the storm provided the perfect cover for Silas and his men to make their move. One night, as the blizzard raged outside, a loud thud shook the cabin. Elias and Elara exchanged a look. It was a log thrown against the door. Then came the shouts, muffled by the wind but unmistakably menacing. "Thorne, send out the girl, or we'll burn you out!" Silas's voice, distorted by the storm, was a chilling promise of destruction. Elias moved swiftly, grabbing his rifle. "Stay low, Elara," he commanded, his voice calm despite the gravity of the situation. Elara, her heart pounding, grabbed her hunting knife. She wasn't a fighter in the traditional sense, but she wouldn't be a helpless victim. She peered through a crack in the window, seeing shadowy figures moving through the swirling snow. They were trying to break down the door, their axes striking against the sturdy wood. The cabin became a fortress, a small bastion of defiance against the encroaching darkness. Elias fired a warning shot through the window, the loud crack echoing through the storm, momentarily scattering the attackers. But they were relentless, fueled by a mixture of greed and vengeance. Elara watched as Elias, with a quiet determination, prepared for a prolonged siege. He was a man of the earth, accustomed to facing nature's fury, and now he was facing the fury of desperate men. The blizzard raged, mirroring the battle within and without, and Elara knew that this night would determine their fate. The siege continued through the long, dark hours of the night. Silas and his men, emboldened by the storm's cover, launched repeated assaults on the cabin. They tried to break down the door, smash the windows, and even attempted to climb onto the roof. Elias, with Elara's help, defended their small sanctuary with a quiet ferocity. He was a skilled marksman, his shots precise and deliberate, aimed not to kill but to deter. Elara, armed with her knife, stood ready, her fear replaced by a cold, hard resolve. At one point, a heavy log splintered a section of the door, creating a dangerous gap. Silas's face, contorted with rage, appeared in the opening. Elias, without hesitation, slammed the butt of his rifle against the log, forcing it back and narrowly missing Silas's head. The attacker roared in frustration. Elara, seeing an opportunity, grabbed a pot of boiling water from the stove and hurled it through the gap, eliciting a yelp of pain from outside. As the night wore on, the attacker's resolve began to wane. The blizzard was taking its toll, and their repeated failures to breach the cabin were demoralizing. Elias, though weary, remained steadfast, his presence a calming anchor for Elara. He wasn't just defending himself, he was defending her, a silent promise of safety in a world that offered little. Elara, in turn, felt a profound sense of loyalty towards him. He had offered her not just shelter, but respect, and in this desolate land that was more precious than gold. As dawn approached, painting the sky with streaks of bruised purple and grey, the attacks finally ceased. The only sounds were the dying whispers of the wind and the soft crunch of snow. Silas and his men had retreated, defeated by Elias's unwavering defense and the harsh realities of the Alaskan winter. Elara looked at Elias, his face smudged with dirt and exhaustion, but his eyes held a quiet triumph. They had survived. This story is just one of many adventures waiting for you. Subscribe to the channel to join our community and never miss a new release. With the blizzard finally breaking its icy grip and the immediate threat of Silas's men gone, a fragile peace settled over the small cabin. The air, though still frigid, carried a lightness it hadn't known in days. The door, splintered and scarred, bore significant damage, a raw testament to the desperate struggle that had unfolded through the long, dark hours of the night. Elara and Elias, their bodies aching with exhaustion, but their spirits alight with a quiet triumph, worked together to patch it up. Their movements were efficient and synchronized, a rhythm born of shared adversity and burgeoning trust. As Elias hammered new planks into place, Elara held them steady, their hands occasionally brushing, a silent understanding passing between them that transcended any need for words. The events of the night had not just tested them, they had forged a bond, deeper and more resilient than any spoken declaration could convey. As they meticulously repaired their sanctuary, Elara found herself looking at Elias with new eyes. He was no longer just the taciturn gold miner who had offered her shelter. He was a protector, a man of unwavering integrity who had risked his own safety for hers without a second thought. "Thank you, Elias," she said, her voice soft, filled with a gratitude that transcended mere politeness. It was a thank you for more than just saving her life. It was a thank you for seeing her, for believing in her, for standing by her when no one else would. "You saved my life." Elias paused, his hammer still suspended in midair. He met her gaze, his eyes, usually so guarded, reflecting a quiet understanding and a deep respect. "You held your own, Elara," he replied, his voice a low rumble. "You're not one to be easily broken." His words, simple and direct, resonated deeply within her, like a warm current melting the ice around her heart. She had always prided herself on her resilience, her ability to endure, to survive against all odds. But in this moment, hearing it acknowledged by him, by this man who understood the brutal realities of the wilderness, it felt profoundly different, more profound. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about being recognized for her strength, not her vulnerability, not for what others had tried to make her. The fear that had gripped her for so long, the fear of being alone, of being preyed upon, of being utterly helpless, began to recede, replaced by a sense of quiet triumph and a burgeoning trust in Elias, in herself, and in the possibility of a future she hadn't dared to imagine. The mining camp slowly, hesitantly, came back to life as the storm lifted its oppressive blanket. Word of the daring attack on Elias's cabin and their successful defense spread quickly through the rough-hewn community. Other miners, many of whom had suffered their own quiet indignities or outright threats at Silas's hands, now looked at Elias with newfound respect, a silent acknowledgement of his courage and principle. Silas and his men, their reputation tarnished and their efforts thwarted by Elias's unwavering stand, soon packed up their meager belongings under the critical eyes of the camp. They slunk away, their unwelcome presence finally gone, swallowed by the vast, indifferent wilderness. Elara knew that the Alaskan frontier still held its inherent dangers, its wild unpredictability, but with Elias by her side, a man who truly saw her worth, she felt a sense of security she hadn't known since the innocent days of her childhood. With Silas's menacing shadow finally gone from the camp, a new rhythm settled into Elara and Elias's lives. The immediate, palpable threat had receded like a harsh tide, allowing them to finally focus on the daily realities of life in the Alaskan wilderness without the constant strain of impending danger. Elias continued his arduous work at the gold claim, his pickaxe ringing against rock, while Elara managed the cabin, turning it into a warm, functional home. Their partnership, forged in the crucible of shared conflict, was now solidifying into something far more than just a temporary arrangement born of necessity. They discovered a comfortable camaraderie in their shared existence, a quiet understanding that often transcended the need for constant conversation. Many evenings were spent in companionable silence, the crackling fire and the distant howl of a wolf the only sounds, each content in the other's steady presence. Elara, no longer consumed by the gnawing fear that had defined so much of her solitary existence, began to truly appreciate the subtle, raw beauty of the Alaskan landscape. Her eyes, once sharp with suspicion, now softened as she absorbed the intricate details of her surroundings. She learned to identify new plants, understanding their medicinal properties or edibility. She began to read the nuanced signs of the changing seasons, the subtle shifts in the wind, the varying calls of birds, the patterns of animal migration, gaining an intimate knowledge of the land around them. In the vast, untamed wilderness, she started to find a profound solace, a sense of belonging she had never anticipated. She also discovered a hidden talent for crafting, her nimble fingers deftly working with the furs she trapped. She created warm, durable clothing, sturdy blankets, and essential gear. Her creations becoming a valuable commodity she occasionally traded with other miners for supplies they couldn't forage or hunt, further cementing her independent contribution to their shared life. Elias, in turn, began to share more of himself, slowly peeling back the layers of his guarded nature. Over steaming mugs of coffee by the fire, he spoke of his past, of the reasons that had brought him to this remote, unforgiving land. He hadn't come for the fleeting promise of quick riches, as so many others had. For him, Alaska offered the quiet solitude he craved and the unrelenting challenge of survival, a crucible that refined a man's character. Elara listened intently, her understanding of him deepening with each shared story, each glimpse into his world. She saw a man who was not just physically strong but also deeply principled, a rare beacon of honesty in a land often defined by greed. He was a man who valued integrity over fleeting gains, a man whose quiet strength stemmed from an unwavering moral compass. Their relationship, born out of desperate necessity and forged in the intense heat of conflict, slowly, organically, blossomed into a quiet companionship. There were no grand declarations of love, no dramatic gestures of romance, for their bond was built on something far more enduring. It was a steady, unwavering presence each found in the other, two individuals who had discovered a unique kind of solace and strength in their shared existence. They were two solitary souls, once adrift in the vastness of the frontier, brought together by the harsh realities of the wilderness, now consciously building a life not on the ephemeral promise of gold, but on the unshakable foundation of mutual respect, shared resilience, and an unspoken profound affection. Years passed swiftly, marked by the relentless turning of the Alaskan seasons, each bringing its own harsh beauty and challenges. The gold rush, like all fevers, eventually subsided, leaving behind a scattering of abandoned claims, ghostly remnants of broken dreams, and a handful of resilient souls who had chosen to make Alaska their enduring home. Elara and Elias were among those steadfast few. Their small cabin, once a temporary refuge from the storm and desperate men, had become a permanent home, warm and lived in, a tangible testament to their enduring partnership and shared journey. They had meticulously built a small life together, not merely surviving the wilderness's demands, but thriving within its vast, unforgiving landscape. Elias continued his mining work, his days still spent at his claim, but his focus had subtly shifted from the elusive promise of a single, massive strike. Instead, he pursued the steady, reliable work that consistently provided for their needs, a practical and grounded approach to their livelihood. Elara, meanwhile, had expanded her crafting, her skills refined through years of practice. Her creations, the intricately stitched fur garments, the warm, durable blankets, became renowned throughout the dwindling community for their exceptional quality and comforting warmth. They were no longer simply the miner and his helper. They were a unified force, a testament to the power of human connection and collaboration in a desolate, often isolating land. Their bond, forged in the fires of shared hardship and quiet understanding, had deepened into a quiet, unwavering love. It was a love born not of passionate whirlwind romance, but of mutual respect, the profound insights gained from shared hardship, and an unspoken understanding that transcended words. They had faced the relentless wilderness together, confronted the brutal greed of desperate men, and navigated the profound challenges of isolation, always finding strength and unwavering support in each other. Elara, who had once cried out, "I'm not for sale," had found a profound safety not in coins, not in material wealth, but in the steadfast presence of a man who saw her intrinsic worth, far beyond any fleeting material gain or societal expectation. One crisp autumn evening, as the northern lights danced across the vast Alaskan sky, painting the darkness with shimmering ethereal hues of green and purple, Elara and Elias sat by the crackling fire within their warm cabin, their hands clasped in a familiar, comforting gesture. The silence between them was not empty but full, rich with the weight of years of shared experiences, unspoken affection, and quiet contentment. They had found their true gold, not buried deep within the earth, but in the enduring strength of their profound connection, a bond forged in the crucible of the unforgiving Alaskan wilderness. Their life together stood as living proof that true wealth lay not in what one possessed, but in who one shared life with, a testament to the resilient and enduring power of the human spirit.